The Ubisoft of today is a very different company than it was 20 years ago. The AAA producer of mega-budget titles such as Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, the Tom Clancy games, and The Division, it's hard to believe that once upon a time they were known for producing, developing, and investing in the weird and offbeat. Imagine showing Ghost Recon Wildlands to someone who stopped gaming in the 80s and they have their response be, "Oh, these are the guys that made Puffy Saga on the Commodore?" Like most companies, their origins were humble, with small manpower and far less brand recognition. It wasn't until 1995 that Ubisoft would boast its first publicly recognized mascot, a figure that no doubt helped Ubisoft rise into the powerhouse that it is today. Who is this mysterious being? Where does he come from? Why is his silhouette so disconnected? Well, as you've probably guessed, this would be none other than Ed from Tonic Trouble. No, of course I'm talking about Rayman, the man, the myth, the thingamajig. Brainchild of gloried and storied game designer Michel Ancel, famous for not making Beyond Good and Evil 2 for a really long time, Rayman started life as a solo project for the Atari ST. In a 2014 interview with RetroGamer.net, Michel unveils the first roots of Rayman's existence. "I first drew Rayman when I was just a teenager. I was simply trying to teach myself to draw, make music, and write code in order to realize my dream of making video games." As a result of development collaborations within the Montpellier area, Ancel eventually landed a position with Ubisoft in 1990. Through a fortunate relationship with the company, Michel would eventually work his way to helming his very own passion project, with a character he had been conceptualizing since his teenage years. One of the core things that would set Rayman apart was a dedication to refined 2D graphics that took advantage of the more powerful hardware, whereas other games were jumping into 3D as early as they could. Although Rayman had his prototype on the Atari ST, and the never-released Super Nintendo CD was discussed as a target platform, the eventual incarnation of the game that we know as the first Rayman went through a lengthy portion of development targeting, of all things, the Atari Jaguar. It seemed perfect. A powerful new machine capable of displaying amazing new graphical capabilities, and as we all know, 32 plus 32 equals what, Clifford?
Can you repeat the question?
Jaguar! Jaguar! Jaguar!
Technology is a funny thing, however, and though a Jaguar version did eventually release, Rayman will forever be remembered for launching and finding the most success on the superior Sony PlayStation hardware. The Jaguar would forever hold a key point in Rayman's development, however. It gave a preemptive quality target to shoot for before the PlayStation was announced. Ancel is also quoted in the aforementioned interview, "Sony's PlayStation was not only far more powerful than the Atari Jaguar, and easier to program, but it also had CD capability, which was perfect for storing our giant textures. Not only did this allow a dazzling array of colors and deeply detailed sprites and tilesets for the time, but the CD format would open up a world of possibilities for audio quality unlike anything really seen prior. The Jaguar version, despite receiving a highly positive reception and is commonly referred to as one of the only good games for the system, is also infamous for its low-fidelity soundtrack that relies on sound fonts and obviously synthetic instruments. Whilst definitely a unique sound, it pales in comparison to the far more fleshed-out tracks found in the PS1's compositions. Stunning audio quality and richly detailed worlds would remain the core of Rayman's identity throughout the franchise's long history. One needs to only glimpse at the game for a second to see just how far this game goes with its style and attention to detail. The painted scenery littered with tiny animated features, the multiple layers of parallax backgrounds, the expressive and consistent stylization of characters and sprites, and the quiet ambiance present throughout the game's world capture your imagination and feel tangible and real. It's the level of involved you'd expect from a mainline Disney film. I can't name anything else in the system that feels anything like it. The game's presentation stands head and shoulders above the crowd, and has aged like fine wine. But what about the game itself? Well, this is a tough one. Part of what makes the game is its presentation, and for that reason, this is a special game in my heart, and will always be. It's one of the earliest games I remember playing ever, back when I was a wee little baby boy. I've always been in love with its world, its characters. It resonates with my sense of being in a way that no game ever since has captured to quite the same extent. Some would call it nostalgia, I genuinely think there's something else to this game. My relationship with the level design, the gameplay, the structure is a little more complicated. I wanted to write this video for a really long time. It wasn't until recently that I felt like I was at the point where I could do it justice, both positively and negatively. Without further ado, let's jump into the past and look at what makes Rayman so special and so hard to recommend at the same time. The game kicks off with a delightful intro video that fills us in on the premise and the world. Video quality aside, it has aged far better than any pre-rendered CG cutscene of the time, opting for more traditional animation methods such as painted backdrops and cartoon characters. The magician informs us that the balance of the world has been upset by Mr. Dark, who has stolen the Great Protoon and defeats Batilla the Fairy as she tries to protect it. This destabilizes the Electoons, a small race of pink energy beings, and they are captured and placed in cages all over the world as freaks and hostile characters appear, capturing every Electoon they can find! Apparently the only hero who can do anything about this is Rayman, who until now has been happily lounging around in a hammock on the beachside. It's quaint, effective, and bookends the adventure with a classic call to action. It's a very fairy tale approach and fits the fantasy world well. Something weird to note about this cutscene is the magician's voice changes between PAL and NTSC regions. The script is the same, but a lot of the timing and intonation is vastly different.
Hi, folks! You want to know what's going on? Let me tell you the story of Rayman! Hi, folks! You want to know what's going on? Let me tell you the story of Rayman!
Maybe it's nostalgia, but the deeper, less eccentric voice of the NTSC voice doesn't have the same whimsical storytelling impact that the PAL one has. This was a strange choice, and it really drives home how pedantic and particular a process localization can be. Starting out, we get a particularly detailed view of the world condensed into a single painted backdrop that serves as the game's hub map. Here, Rayman walks from medallion to medallion, progressing along branching paths that lead him through each of the world's varied locations. It's cool to see distant hints of the lands and worlds up ahead, and as a kid, I really struggled to progress in this game, so this carrot on a string led to a lot of fantasizing and dwelling of what could possibly lay left unexplored. Small touches like this really make a game feel more like a journey, and less of an obstacle course. Additionally, the whole map is viewed through the binoculars of Mr. Dark, who is watching Rayman's progress as he draws ever closer to stopping him. Similar to the Wicked Witch's crystal ball in The Wizard of Oz, it's a classic framework device that finds a unique place in video game form, in a way I haven't really seen it be used before. Each of the game's worlds connect and branch into different routes, and usually a different ability is found in a level at the end of each route. The first of these worlds, the Dream Forest, is a dense and magical sprawl of giant trees, swamps, and peculiar plants and fauna, and is populated by angry hunters out to catch Electoons and stop Rayman in his tracks. Whilst it is the easiest world, there are levels within that serve to test a player's skill, even this early. Initially, however, the only level open is a surprisingly long intro stage, the Pink Plant Woods. Rayman's goal in a level is to find an exclamation point sign at the end of the level, and destroy any Electoon cages along the way. He can pick up tings, blue orbs that play a musical melody when picked up in succession, and collect 100 for an extra life. Additionally, there are power-ups that remain on Rayman's person until he dies. These include a golden fist to power up attacks, a super fist to increase the range of set attacks, a special potion that allows Rayman to fly found at specific levels, and a couple of one-off gimmicks, like a magic seed that allows Rayman to plant platforms sprouting flowers, and a firefly that lights up dark caves. His basic attack is also pretty unique, in which Rayman literally throws his fist out like a boomerang, which can be charged while standing still by holding the attack button, and is used a plethora of creative ways throughout the game. Imagine sort of like Link's boomerang, but in a 2D platforming format. Rayman's power-ups extend his toolkit a respectable amount too, and consist of a ledge grab, a helicopter hair move that extends jump time and distance, a grappling fist that allows swinging from flying rings, and a sprint move that builds momentum and allows Rayman to launch himself further with a jump at the cost of height. Rayman's platforming nature is pretty standard at face value, but where it gets bizarre is everything else. First off, each level on the map will actually consist of a collection of individual stages, with no standard amount to expect. This means if you missed an Electoon cage in the middle of the stage group, you have to make your way there and then finish off the rest of the group before you can return to the map and save your progress. This makes backtracking a chore, and you can expect to get pretty familiar with a lot of these stages throughout your playthrough. Hopefully, the cage you missed will be in the first stage of a grouping, in which case you can go to the backwards arrow at the start and return to the map with the cage registered. These arrows only appear on the first stage of a grouping, however, so returning to a prior stage is only allowed on replay of the entire grouping. It's a strange system that punishes in a situational manner. I know it's normal for a game to have multiple boards per level, but in a lot of instances these are full-blown stages with level groupings that sometimes end in boss fights. I mentioned before that Rayman has to collect abilities from each world that allow him to expand his toolset as you progress. Whilst the power-ups themselves are cool and sometimes inventive, you bet your ass you're gonna have to backtrack once you've earned them to get previously inaccessible Electron cages. Couple this with the frustrating backtracking limitations and system I just described, and you can see where things get grueling. This is evident even as far as in the first level. Rayman has no ability to attack until halfway through the grouping, meaning you have to walk past cages that are sitting in plain sight. Fantastic. Whilst you do have a tongue waggle that humorously scares away certain enemies, you're otherwise defenseless too. This wouldn't be so bad if the life and game over system weren't structured in such an unforgiving way. Whilst there are checkpoints, adorably presented as novelty photographer stations, if Rayman runs out of lives, he hits the game over screen, at which players can use a game over token to come back with a small amount of extra lives. But be warned, you use one, that's a permanent loss on that save. There is absolutely no way to get another game over token without a cheat code. Even the best game over music and creative background image can't make up for how unforgiving this is. If you get a game over and run out of tokens, it's back to the title screen without a choice. If you forgot to save, which by the way are manual save points the player has to walk to on the world map, you've lost that progress. And you still don't have any more game over tokens in case it happens again. There have been cases where I've completely given up on a save because I've had 0 lives and 0 continues left, and the levels were just way too risky to grind tings on. So the easy solution is just to make sure you're on top of your life count, right? If only it were that simple. Whilst there are extra lives hidden throughout every level, they are a one-time only deal, and often enough provide a life-threatening challenge to obtain. Doesn't matter if you game over, return to the stage, these elusive little buggers will be gone for good once picked up. Getting 100 tings is far more of a chore than it initially seems too, as killing enemies doesn't net you any and there's no treasure chests or question mark blocks to get them in bulk either. They have to be picked up one by one by one by one by one until that delightful melody is drilled into your brain for the rest of your life. The magician appears in levels, offering a platforming challenge at the cost of a differing amount of tings. The first time you beat these, you get an extra life, but surprise surprise, this is also a one-time deal. There's no life penalty for failing these, it'll simply run you short of tings if you keep failing. If you're really in a bind for lives though, you can grind these challenges for a small amount of bonus tings at a time. If you collect everyone in the challenge, you'll always come out with just over the amount you went in with. I can't stress this enough though, only do this if you're absolutely desperate, otherwise it is not worth the time consumption. Some of these levels are absolute gauntlets, and then can even have the audacity to culminate in a boss fight. The first boss you'll fight thankfully is an easy one. It's stage 2 against fan favorite Bzzzt, a small pink mosquito. This boss fight did do something that blew my mind way back when though. After beating him, Bzzzt bursts into tears while Rayman is doing a victory dance. Realizing this and taking pity on him, Rayman pats Bzzzt on the back and the two become friends. In the next section, Rayman is riding on Bzzt's back in a neat flying stage. If I have to say Bzzt one more time, I think I'm gonna scream. The idea of taking mercy on an enemy, let alone making friends, was new in a context like this, and I can't really name any games outside of RPGs for the time that flirted with this concept. However, this also gets mixed up later in the Dream Forest, in which it appears that Bzzzt is now hostile towards Rayman, following him with a giant spiked fruit in an auto-scrolling stage. This is actually supposed to be Mosquito, a different colored, much more hostile and stronger counterpart to Bzzzt, but the wrong sprite was used in the chase. To make matters more confusing, the DOS version of the game features the wrong sprite even in the Mosquito boss battle. Despite this, the world and detail in the game is so deliberate and carefully constructed that as a child I accepted this and even built a story in my head. I thought that Mosquito was Bzzt's father, and upon discovering the friendship between his son and Rayman, disapproved and ordered him to kill his new friend. With a desperate expression and tears, I thought they were tears, okay, I didn't think it was, it's obviously sweat, I thought it was tears. He chases Rayman down with a giant fruit, but lets him go when he reaches the end of the stage, unable to commit to his orders. This leads to Mosquito having to face off against Rayman himself. I guess child me was writing fanfiction in his head, huh? Oops. Another level in Dream Forest is Swamps of Forgetfulness, in which a friendly character named Terezan, an extremely weird and out-of-place character I must admit, will give Rayman a magic seed in exchange for getting his leopard skin down from a tree. Rayman can then plant these seeds infinitely for the rest of the stage on grass, and they will sprout a platform for Rayman to mantle. On the first seed planted, the rain will pick up and the level will reveal itself as a vertical scrolling stage. Whilst easier than the later vertical scrollers in the game, it can still be a surprise and a challenge on your first playthrough. Also, the end of the stage does this at the end of it. Yeah, no, screw you, game. Fuck off. This life is possible to get without a power-up, but the timing is extremely tight, and it's not worth the risk. Come back once you have the sprint power-up if you need it. When it comes time to fight Mosquito at the end of Mosquito's Nest, the player can expect an amped up version of Zit's fight. New attacks involve carrying 3 different spiked fruit with different properties. One bounces high, one bounces low, and one must be crawled under. It's cool to see a fight from earlier built upon in a more dire situation, at the end of a stage group rather than near the beginning, and with far more health and threats. The journey towards Mosquito's Nest is surprisingly tough for the game's first world, and can be really tough on newcomers. This will likely lead most to opt out of it until later, heading towards Bandland first to take in the new sights and sounds. What lies ahead is the infamous Bongo Hills. A grueling marathon of 6 stages, it is one of the longest in the game, and the cause of many a game over for Little Me, Big Me, and everyone else. This is known as a breaking point for a lot of people, as the difficulty curve spikes up for this one, and doesn't reach these heights again for a while after. It could be tempting to dust off the remainder of the Dream Forest levels instead, and that can be a pretty good idea, a good way to learn, but it runs the risk of wasting lives and is usually a pretty good idea to get Bongo Hills out of the way whilst your resources are plentiful. You can't get all the cages on your first run anyway, as it requires a power-up found in just the next level, which is incredibly frustrating, so getting the power-up from Mosquito's Nest won't help you one bit here. From a design standpoint, this level is the earliest and most blatant display of Rayman's biggest issues. From poorly telegraphed hazards with a camera that can be too close to tell, to enemies with strange attack patterns, too much health and finicky hitboxes, hazards that sometimes hurt a single health point and at other times are insta-kill despite having identical sprites, and the introduction of these freaking things. It's a shame the world starts with such a notorious level, as a lot of the game's strengths also come into play throughout its run. Environmental gimmicks become more common, with sliding metal note lines and rocket maracas, a tiny fairy who shrinks Rayman to reach small passageways, trumpets that pull or push Rayman around with extreme speed, some of the most beautiful music tracks in a collection of surrealistic but peaceful imagery. Aesthetically, Bandland remains my favorite location in the entire franchise, and some of my favorite levels are here too. Gong Heights, for example, features methodical timing-based platforming and takes place entirely in the clouds, offering a really nice change of pace from the speedy slopes of Allegro Presto and Mr. Sax's Hullabaloo. The rest of the levels are significantly shorter than Bongo Hills too, with the game using up most of the Bandland stages in that one level it seems. Thankfully, the world culminates with a solid boss battle against Mr. Sax, who functions almost like a bullet hell boss. He'll fire bombs out of his opening at you, which will explode into angry music notes and bounce around the screen. Occasionally, he'll fire a note at you that is visually unique to the others, which can be punched back at him to chip away at his health. It's a decent fight that goes on for too long, but the real star here is the presentation. Mr. Sax's sprite is detailed and intimidating, and the background frames the fight perfectly. Bandland is, overall, a solid world, but Bongo Hills is where the game's biggest issues are most prominently put to the test, and it makes sense that people decide their feelings toward the game based on it. It's a super hard gate to get through, and even if you do, it can ruin your save and stop you from progressing much further. It hurts the flow, difficulty curve, and feeling of adventure overall. While it isn't as hard as later areas such as parts of Picture City, Cave of Scops, in particular the stage Eat at Joe's, we don't talk about Eat at Joe's. It's the lack of experience most players go in with that churns them out. It's also a nightmare to collect Electoon cages on, as most of them are hidden deviously. See, the game likes to do this little thing where it hides event triggers with an easy to miss, faint sparkle effect that just flat out makes them invisible. A telltale sound effect will always play when one is triggered, or at least most of the time. But even if you find one, there's no telling what effect it actually had. Sometimes this can make a cage appear or a route open somewhere you've already been, but without having been through the levels a few times, you'll never know what's changed in the environment or what you're supposed to be noticing. So you're probably at the point now where you're saying, okay, this sounds really hard if you want to go for 100%, but me and most people, we just want to go through and beat the game. Just get to the end. Okay. No, you can ignore the 100%. If you don't want to finish the game, that is. Yeah, to beat this game, beat the final boss, beat the final level, you have to get every single Electoon cage. Every single one. 100%. The final word of the game doesn't even appear on the map if you haven't done this. It's a shame too because the game actually has a really good gauntlet to finish with. It's not the hardest stage in the game, but it really pushes the player's knowledge of Rayman's weight, moveset, and speed by having an evil clone follow you through the level that mimics your exact actions a couple seconds behind, and will immediately kill both of you if you come into contact. Not only is it actually pretty impressive for the time on a programming level, but the way the space of the stage is designed to accommodate it is pretty cool too. The final boss, however, is a mixed bag. It's a creative take on a boss rush, in which Mr. Dark will retreat and send Frankenstein versions of past bosses mashed together after you. There's also a neat little effect where the stained glass windows will light up to show you who's coming mixed with who. You have to be on your toes and remember past attacks, but the problem here is, it's so easy. Mr. Dark's attacks in particular are insultingly easy to avoid. It tries to build a sense of tension by lifting Rayman's attack power away from him, but the attacks are so telegraphed and slow that it's really nothing intimidating. It's such a grueling hard game, for so much effort to get to this point. It's such a cakewalk. I mean, you literally have to walk cake to get here. The background is nice though, and the sprite work is mashed together in a coherent and functional manner, playing off the modularity of the original character designs. But then again, knowing how this game does hard when it does hard, I'd rather the boss be a cakewalk than an impossible brick wall. Also, it gave us the godsend majesty that is Bazit's head on Space Mama's body with Mr. Sax's shoes, and it just looks like a big, huggable friend that wants to crush you with its ass. With a cute touch, the credit roll provides a bunch of original, high-quality artwork that shows Rayman and friends having fun on holiday now that peace has been restored to the world. But for a game to ask so much of you for 100% and then have its completionist reward be just the end of the game, it's really not enough. Even the closing cinematic is just reused footage from the intro with celebration sounds laid out over it. Not even a closing narration from the magician to tell us how the world's energy is restored or anything. We don't even technically defeat Mr. Dark. When he retreats at the start of the fight, that's the last time we see him in the game. The end of the fight just ends after the last mutant boss. Rayman starts celebrating even though the most powerful villain in the world just got away. I understand leaving room for a sequel, but by this logic we could have just had the Electoons and had the world be okay either way without bothering to fight Mr. Dark. Also, if you know what Rayman 2 is, you know none of this applied. There was no sequel set up here. It sounds nitpicky, but to open on such a strong, well-produced cutscene and then end with nothing is really disappointing. Although I have to be honest about something. I can't claim the frustrations of a player who's just slogged their way to get through this point to do 100% because I've never legitimately finished the game. I've finished every level and I've beaten every boss on save, but I have never, ever in all of my life managed to find all of those Electoon cages. I refuse to use a walkthrough, as I want to savor the legitimacy, the closure of the moment when I finish this game and have the save file on a memory card. Until then, I get as many as I can, make sure I've beaten everything, and then shamefully use a tried and true old school password to start a temporary save with all of the cages found. I've been playing this game for as long as I can remember too. The cages are just heading that obtusely, that nefariously, and with the game over and completion system makes this game near impossible for me to recommend without cheat codes. For all of its fantastic worlds and brilliant portions of level design, there's too much malice towards the player to make it a cohesive and balanced experience. This isn't harsh but fair like other old school games. This is just barriers and hurdles for the sake of making it unfriendly and, to my suspicions, punish players who are renting the game by gatekeeping a huge amount of content behind a high difficulty wall. Whilst the game has seen a dozen versions in its lifespan, a modern update has never come. Even modern collections that include the game still simply print the DOS version on a new disc. Even the recently released mobile port is an emulation of this version, which sucks because not only is the DOS version of Rayman 1 missing a fair amount of backgrounds and large portions of the soundtrack, its palette is also limited and the sprite quality lower than what's available on the PS1. The best version of the game is honestly the emulated PS1 version on the PSP and Vita, which again is still emulation as opposed to a native port, so no accommodations for widescreen. Whereas Rayman 2 gets a ton of port love, some would say too much, and even Rayman 3 has an HD edition, Rayman 1 has sort of lost a time as far as official support goes. A revamped version is something that I would beg for if I had the influence. Something that rebalances the game's core structure and takes notes from later games in the series. Something that ferries the original spirit, the original nugget of gold in an aging shell, and trims the fat away. Sadly, with the lackluster manner in which Ubisoft has palmed off this game, I don't see this happening officially ever. However, there is hope. A user by the name of Rayman is working on an unofficial recreation and rearrangement of the original Rayman, appropriately named Rayman Redemption, which aims to recreate the original game but restructure sorely needed aspects, add a bunch of collectible stuff, and even create new level portions within the old ones. They've even done their own original sprite work and it fits the original style shockingly well. From what I can see in gameplay demos, the character controller is near identical in terms of weight and handling to the original version. I'm super impressed from what I've already seen. I hope this project gets the love and attention it deserves and continues to grow strong and true. Rayman is at an odd point in his lifestyle, where he has franchise recognition from fans, but no real active presence as a mascot, especially not in terms of representing Ubisoft anymore. Even Michelle Ancel posted this picture on Instagram last year, with the tear-jerking caption, "Yesterday I met Rayman for real, in store. Far from his time of glory, looking ahead for some help. Pathetic." But ends with, "After Wild, after BGE 2, we'll need to bring him back again, for his 4th adventure." A surprisingly hopeful note, if not accurate at all, as Rayman has had quite a few adventures by now, more than 4 at least. The entries we have had in a long amount of time have, for the most part, been stellar, but Rayman faces a similar treatment by Ubisoft that Capcom gave to Mega Man Forever until recently. Whilst Rayman did just get announced for Brawlhalla, we haven't had any confirmed game news in years. The last mainline release was all the way back in 2013 with Rayman Legends. But those are other games to look at in other videos. This has been Dubious, and this has been my complex and frustrated relationship with a game I hold in the cradle of my heart. A game that inspired me to follow art, to get emotionally involved with media, to grow the creative parts of my mind. When I was a kid, I would get graph paper out and I would literally design stages, Mario Maker style, with mechanics and assets from the game scribbled out as accurately as I could. Another version of the game would eventually ship with a level editor, but again, another video for another time. Thank you for listening to this old chat for this long. If anything, I want people to know what makes this game great without going in and being taken aback by all of the issues. I want people to experience this world and see what makes it so involved, so special. Maybe that's overly optimistic, and to others it's nothing more than a relic, but I hope it makes someone else as happy, as inspired, as it made me.